Friends, a very good afternoon and warm welcome to all of you. Myself, CA Dipti Jain from GyaanStation welcomes you all in today's webinar. It's very well said that alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. Alone I can go fast and together we can go far. So with this vision to provide consistent knowledge, learning, upgradation and unstoppable webinars throughout the year, 6 organizations have joined their hands together to serve our professionals, brothers and sisters. We proudly say that this webinar series we are conducting jointly with Income Tax Bar Association Ahmedabad, All Gujarat Federation of Tax Consultants, GSTBA, TAG are our associate organizations. Today we have with us a very eminent speaker and expert from Ahmedabad, CA Tapas Ruparelia ji, who is going to enlighten us on the topic invoice management system, a very crucial for all the businesses and so likely for the professionals. So here I take directly the privilege to introduce our speaker. And before we have with us Shailesh Makwana ji, also the president. Sir, welcome you in today's
Thank you.
webinar.
Yes. Thank you.
Sir, we would like to have a welcome speech for all our participants from your side. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Hello.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
हाँ आज के सब अपने ज्वाइंट हुए सब मेंबर्स दीप्ति बहन जैन, आज के स्पीकर श्री तपस भाई रूपारेलिया एंड ऑल द पार्टिसिपेंट। आज का जो टॉपिक है तपस भाई का, जो सही में 2 बार मैंने ये सुन चुका हूं मैं, सही में बहुत ही इफेक्टिव और जरूरी जो अपने नया प्रोसीजर के लिए है, तो बहुत ही बढ़िया एक उसका स्पीच है नॉलेज के लिए और इंटरनेट का या ये अपना इसके लिए बहुत ही बढ़िया उसका नॉलेज है, तो उसका अपना सबको ये लाभ मिलेगा। तो सबको वेलकम और तपस भाई को थैंकफुल टू टुडे, आज उसने अपने को टाइम दिया है, तो अभी सबको मैं वेलकम करता हूँ और तपस भाई को एग्री करता हूँ। ठीक है, थैंक यू।
Thank you, Shailesh bhai. And thank you. You are always there with us in all the sessions, and your presence gives the grace to the event.
Yes.
And now here I introduce our today's speaker, Tapas Ruparelia ji. He is a fellow chartered accountant, company secretary, and DISA qualified professional with over 14 years of experience. He has held significant roles, including manager at PwC, director at KC Mehta and Company LLP, where he focused on indirect taxes, advisory, compliance, and litigation. Currently, as associate vice president at his Signet Infotech, he lead a team focused on GST, e-invoicing in India, global VAT, and e-invoicing as well as indirect tax automation. He has rich experience in GST, VAT implementation, having assisted companies across India and UAE. And he had handled the complex litigations assignments from drafting appeals to representing clients up to the tribunal level. So he is an active contributor to the profession and invitee to the GST and Indirect Tax Committee of ICI, co-chair of the Indirect Tax Committee at the Ahmedabad branch, and many more accolades to him. So sure, we are going to have a very insightful, important decision, important presentation, insightful knowledge from Tapasji on the topic invoice management system, where very importantly, I request all the participants, what we are going to cover in next 2 hours, next 1.5 hours, we will cover in today's topic overview of invoice management system, impact of IMS on the business, practical challenges and possible solutions, and technology solutions to automate the process. So highlight will be on all these points. Kindly stay tuned till the end of the session. Thank you. So over to you, Tapasji. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, Deepti ji. Thank you, Shailesh bhai,
Yes,
for the
sir.
welcome. I would like to thank again Deepti ji and all the associations for having this wonderful sessions on a regular basis. I keep seeing the status, and I'm privileged to be invited at this forum. I can already see that there are almost 115 participants who have joined us for this session. So while IMS was introduced way back in 2000, I mean October 2024, I believe the curiosity with respect to IMS is, and I think there are a lot of nuances which one really has to understand. And we'll make this session interactive. I'll try and cover as much as of thought that I have on IMS. Would request two things. There would be certain questions that I would keep asking during the sessions. I would request all the participants to answer those or give your comments, or even if you, I mean, some questions would only require probably an emoji. Put that in the chat box. And if you have any questions which you would like me to answer at the end of the session, please put it in the Q&A box. Let's not mix both of them. अगर आप question ऐसा पूछ लेंगे which is supposed to be answered by me, and if it goes to the chat box, I might not be able to look at it. Nevertheless, we'll try to address as many questions as possible. I'll quickly share my screen. Is my screen visible properly?
Yes, yes, full screen is visible.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah. So invoice management system, we've all seen this way back in 2017 when the IMS was introduced. Sorry, when the GST was introduced. At that time, the way the government has envisaged the compliance process was a vendor files his GSTR 1, and the customer sees all these invoice details in his GSTR 2A. That would be the auto drafted purchase return. Then the recipient was allowed to make changes or add certain documents which would have been missed out by way of filing these details in the GSTR2. So details come in into GSTR2A, you add or delete or modify details, and then file the GSTR2. And then the details of this GSTR2 goes into the GSTR1A of the supplier, and the supplier has the right to either accept, reject, or or keep those invoices on hold. And then based on the GSTR 1 that the supplier had filed, his own GSTR 2 that he would have filed, and the additional invoices that would have flown, or the corrections that would have flown through GSTR 1A, all these invoices, everything combined together would populate into a GSTR 3, and the return would have been filed. This is what was envisaged when the GST law came in. However, if any of you were involved in the filing at the time when when GST was introduced and the returns were actually to be filed, it was practically a nightmare. Uh, GSTR 1 was, of course, filed by a lot of people, but when it came to GSTR 2A, since the GST was actually implemented, I would say that the technology of it, there was not sufficient time for companies to innovate around the softwares. At that time, the system was not so matured where you could take bulk actions. And imagine companies having lakhs and lakhs of line items on a monthly basis. They were practically failing to go into their GSTR 2A, verify each and everything, and then also uploading the missing invoices, correct the invoices. It was practically difficult. So the government, having realized that, and as usual, there were a lot of system challenges that were there. Realizing all these challenges, the government held back the GSTR2 mechanism. In fact, GSTR1 was also something which was kept on hold because there were a lot of technical glitches which was being faced by a lot of taxpayers. And they ultimately introduced something called GSTR3B, because until the time you file your monthly return, the government wouldn't get their monthly payments, which was the most important part of the compliance that the government wanted. So what the government said is that on a temporary basis, right now you ascertain your liability, you ascertain your input tax credit and pay the balance amount. You file this summary statement right now in the form of GSTR 3B, and we will this GSTR 1 and 2 will be implemented at a later stage. Then GSTR 1 due dates were extended, GSTR 1 were filed by the taxpayers. GSTR 2 was something which was not implemented. And later on, the government only introduced GSTR 2A, which was based on the GSTR 1 that was filed by the supplier. And the government said that this is what it is. Right now, you file your GSTR 1, pure liabilities in GSTR 3B. GSTR 2 and 3 we'll see on a later date when to implement, and slowly and gradually it died its natural death. And GSTR 3B is something which has become a permanent return now, which was earlier envisaged as only a stopgap arrangement. This is a timeline of some of the major changes that came in into GST since its introduction. From July 2017, the biggest introduction or the biggest change that came in was in 2018 when e-way bill was introduced, which is the source of all the litigations across the country right now. Then in October 2019, the government suddenly said that whatever credit you are taking into your GST returns, you start looking at your GST 2A. They introduced something called Rule 36(4) and they said that GST 2B में 2A में जितना भी credit दिखता है, I will allow you to take a maximum credit of 120% of that amount. So if your books of accounts you had 130 rupees of credit and your GST at 2A showed 100, you could have maximum taken a credit of 120. This was then later on, after a couple of months, reduced to 110%, and then it was reduced to 105%. So it was introduced in October 2019. By February 2020, this was reduced to 105%. And later on, they introduced something called GSTR 2B in 2020, which people were not taking so seriously. The GSTR 2B was not being taken as seriously. It was just said that this is one is static document, the other is a dynamic document. That's the only difference. It's only the difference the way it is getting populated. And while GSTR 2B was there since 2020, 21, people were not taking it as seriously. In the meantime, e-invoicing was something which was a game changer that was introduced by the government. Right now, the turnover limit is 105 crores, beyond which, if you have a turnover any time since the introduction of GST, you are required to generate an e-invoice. And then in January 2022, the government made GSTR 2B mandatory. This mandate was made by way of introducing relevant change into the GST law. Now, why I'm going through this entire journey is that I want you to feel a deja vu when I go to how the IMS is being introduced. So, as I said repeatedly, GSTR 2B was an optional functionality which was introduced by the government 2021. People were not looking at it. People were saying that at the end of the year, we'll look at GSTR 2A and we'll do the reconciliation. And in the GSTR 9, we'll take our credit accordingly. Table 8 of GSTR 9 also gets populated on the basis of my GSTR 2A only. So this 2B is something which is coming additionally. I don't need to pay attention to it. Come January 2022, GSTR 2B was made mandatory. Now I understand there are still a couple of people who don't follow GSTR 2B till date. And again, the audits till 2021 have been completed. The audit from 2022 will start now, and you will see how important it was to follow the compliance, the matching with GSTR 2B. So this was the timeline, and now one of the biggest changes after e-invoicing, and I believe this is even a bigger change as compared to e-invoice that has come in into the GST system, is the IMS. Now, what is IMS, how it works, etc. Everything we'll discuss in detail. But going back to my previous slide, IMS is something which is similar to this. Earlier, it was accept, reject, on hold, and you were required or you were allowed to add additional details, additional invoices, or make changes to the invoices that are appearing in your GSTR 2A. IMS is something where you are only allowed to take accept, reject, or pending action. That's it. You are not allowed to do anything else into IMS. But this is something which has been introduced. Now, why has IMS been introduced after so many years of bringing in GSD and the government scrapping the entire idea of GSTR 2 and GSTR 3? There are certain challenges both at the taxpayer side as well as the government side, wherein the government does not have the line item details and the taxpayers are required to maintain a lot of different sort of reconciliations. And when the tax authorities come in at the time of audit, it is very difficult for the taxpayers also to justify their claims. As well as at the government authorities, there is always a sort of discomfort when the different sort of Excel sheets are provided during the audits. So, what is the fundamental problem of the government? The biggest problem that the government has right now is that it doesn't have the transactional level details when it comes to input tax credit. while your GSTR 2B gets populated every month. Uh, if you are taking a credit which is not as per GSTR 2B, the government doesn't have the line item details. On the top of it, there is something called temporary availment, temporary reversal. There is something called permanent reversal. And then there is something called re-availment of temporarily reverse credit, which is reclaim. Now, the ITC that is being temporarily reversed and being re-availed later on, again, the government doesn't have a line item details. All the government has is only information which says that on a gross basis you have uh, temporarily reversed so much of credit, and then on a gross basis you have reclaimed so much of credit. Line item details are not available with the government, and Indian taxpayers are smart enough, the tax consultants are smart enough. Even if somebody has not taken a credit, forgot to take a credit, or earlier park the credit as a blocked credit, the taxpayers or the tax consultants are smart enough to disclose this into a reavailment or reclaim of a credit later on, so that there is no mismatch between the GSTR 2B versus the credit that you claim in GSTR 3B. Otherwise, you get an automated notice. To get away from these automated notices, people show a reclaim of credit. To again tackle this scenario on an aggregate basis, what the government has done is they've introduced temporarily reversed credit, reversed and reclaimed ledger is something that the government has introduced. Through this, they are what essentially they are ensuring is that if you have in the past temporarily reversed the credit worth rupees 100 on a cumulative basis, in a particular month, you should not be taking reclaiming a credit of more than this amount. If you have reversed a temporary amount, a temporarily reversed 100 rupees ka credit, then in a month you cannot reclaim 110 ka credit. It should be within that 100 which you had earlier reversed on a temporary basis. But that still does not solve the problem of the government of having the line item details. Earlier, when the return that was envisaged in GSTR 2, you were confirming all the line item details, and those line item details were only getting populated into your GSTR 3, which is not the case currently. Your GSTR 3B is editable. You can go ahead and make changes to your GSTR 3B, the credit that is populated through GSTR 2B, you can go and change it manually. Now, if you keep changing these credits on a manual basis, you are bound to receive notices during your GST audit. Also, the department comes and audits, and if these amounts are not justified properly, these leads into presumptive notices. And most of the time, these notices are uh, probably because of mentality issues at the government, at the officers end, wherein if they are not completely satisfied with the working etc that you provide, then they issue a notice. They would say that it is not my problem, I am not going to take a risk of dropping these kind of notices. uh, you justify it at an appeal level. I am going to issue a notice, and these notices also result into an adjudication. And again, at the time of adjudication, also the officers are reluctant to pass a favorable order if you even if you give all those satisfactory answers to them. Having said that, even if the orders have come in, you want to go into an appeal, and these appeals are, you feel that these are going to be in your favor. These appeals, if the demands are high pitched, then appeals require a certain amount of pre-deposits, and these pre-deposits are is something which adversely affects the taxpayers. Another problem with the taxpayer is maintaining these Excel sheets. So in a month, you have temporarily reversed some amount of credit, and then in the next month you want to reavail the credit. When you want to reavail the credit, you go to the previous month's Excel sheet and try to find out what was the final temporarily reversed credit. And the way we are all relying upon Excel, most of the times it is difficult to find out in all those pool of Excel sheet which is the final sheet, whether the sheet with the name final is the final sheet, or the sheet with the name of fully final is my final sheet, or a sheet which doesn't have the name final, but that is something which was modified on the date of filing the return, that is on the 20th of the month in the last period. That is the latest edited file, which is the final file. That is the biggest problem with the Excel sheet. So maintaining all those different Excel sheets, and after 3 years justifying those monthly temporary reverse and reavailment of credit, is something which is a tedious task for the taxpayers as well. So these are some sort of problems that IMS is trying to resolve. I'm not saying that it is actually resolving these issues, but at the taxpayer's end and at the government's end, these are the issues that are there which IMS is trying to resolve. And we'll see in a bit to resolve these issues, whether actually one issue is being resolved by bringing in 10 other issues is something that we'll deliberate during the session. Now, this is the flow of IMS. This is how IMS has been structured. Please don't get worried or tensed about the flow of IMS. I will break the entire flow, each of the boxes step by step. We'll discuss each of the steps and then I'll pause for some time to uh, discuss on these issues. Discuss on all the entire flow of the IMS, and then we'll raise certain issues and we'll deliberate on whether there are, as such, any resolutions with respect to this IMS or not. So what happens is, how does the IMS work? As soon as a supplier generates an e-invoice, there are two cases in terms of outward supply. Either the supplier is covered under e-invoice or he is not covered under e-invoice. When a supplier is covered under e-invoice, in that case, immediately as the supplier uploads an invoice or generates an e-invoice on the IRN portal, the IRN portal, which is known as IRP invoice registration portal, that IRP pushes the data onto the GSTR1. As soon as I generate an IRN on the IRP, that data gets pushed by the IRP to the GSTR1 module. And this particular invoice for which I have generated an IRN goes and sits as a draft invoice into my GSTR1 data. So if I have created e-invoices for all my outward supply, then all my outward supply would be by default there in my GSTR1 data as after at the end of the month. I do not have to generate a new GSTR1. All I have to do is look at the invoices which are there and file my GSTR1. So generation of e-invoice replicates the same invoice into my GSTR1 data. Now, as soon as I have an invoice comes into my GSTR1 in a draft status from the IRP, that invoice goes into my IMS details. That is the IMS module of my GSTR on the GSTN portal. So as soon as an invoice is appearing into the GSTR1 of my supplier, as a recipient, I will be able to see the invoice onto my IMS portal. Now, once an invoice comes into my IMS portal, I will have three options to take actions. What are the options? The first option is to accept that particular invoice. If I have accepted a particular invoice, it goes into my GSTR2B. Second action that I can take is reject action. If I reject a particular invoice, that invoice doesn't flow to my GSTR2B. It's only the accepted invoices that go to the GSTR2B. The third action that I can take is the pending action. Now, as soon as I take a pending action, the invoice stays within the IMS system. Consider IMS as a filter. All the invoices that come into IMS are stopped by the IMS filter. They ask, just like a police or a traffic police guy standing at the signal. If let's say there is a checking that is going on, the police will stop all the vehicles, check their vehicle details or transaction details. If they find everything okay, they will let the vehicle go. If they feel that there is something wrong, they find out something wrong, then they will detain that vehicle. And if there is some clarification, etc., required, if the invoice is missing and the person is saying that, look, I will get my invoice from the DigiLocker, please give me some time, then they will ask the vehicle to get parked onto the site till the time that issue is resolved. So imagine IMS as a similar filter. If I if the invoice is accepted, it is flown onto the in my GSTR2B. If the invoice is rejected, which means it is detained, it doesn't flow to my GSTR2B. It disappears from the IMS at a later stage. If I mark the invoice as pending, it remains into the IMS system. It doesn't go out into the GSTR2B. Now, there is a fourth option which is called no action. Let's say you are going through the vehicle and the police guy doesn't stop you at all and the vehicle passes without any check. In that case, it is considered as a no action and it would be as good as an accept action. So accept or no action will have a same fate. Both these transactions would flow to the GSTR 2B. And this is how the IMS has been made optional by the government. What they are saying is if a particular invoice or any document that comes into IMS, let's say an invoice or a debit note or a credit note, if that comes into IMS and there is no action taken by the recipient on this invoice, then that invoice will be marked as deemed accepted by the IMS system and will be pushed to GSTR 2B. Now, when will these transactions be pushed to GSTR 2B? Will come on to that point, but before that, there are certain transactions which are not going to move to the IMS, and these transactions are something which will move to directly to GSTR 2B. What are these transactions? First type of transaction is transaction which are covered under reverse charge mechanism. The problem with the government is that they are very sure that there would be certain unscrupulous taxpayers who would take disadvantage of the system. So if I have raised an invoice to you, let's assume I am an advocate, or let's say Shailesh is an advocate, he raises an invoice on a business taxpayer who is registered under GST. That person is required to pay tax under reverse charge, considering that advocate services are covered under RCM. Now that taxpayer goes and rejects this invoice into IMS and uh, doesn't accept his liability to pay tax under reverse charge. To avoid these kind of scenarios, what the government is saying that these transactions are not going to flow into our IMS. These transactions would move directly to your GSTI 2B. If you still feel that RCM is not payable, you take a call, but these transactions are going to move to your GSTI 2B. Similarly, other two transactions where ITC is either time barred, which is where invoices are raised or uploaded by the your supplier after the due date of section 16.4, which is the 30th of November, or transactions where there is a POS mismatch. So let's say I am sitting in the state of Gujarat. I go to Maharashtra, I stay in a hotel, I give my Gujarat's GST number to that hotel, and that hotel charges me GST. We are all aware that in case of hotel, the place of supply is the location of the immobile property. So even if I would have provided my Gujarat's GST number, the hotel would have charged GST, CGST, and SGST of Maharashtra state. So the way the GST portal works is that right now also these two type of ITC, the ITC time bar as well as POS mismatch, are coming as an ineligible credit onto the GSTR 2B. So these two transactions right after introduction of IMS also would move directly to GSTR 2B as an ineligible credit, and these transactions would not come onto the IMS portal. That is one. Now there are certain transactions which will not be allowed to be kept pending into the IMS system. So we have discussed that all the documents that come into the IMS, uh, accept, reject, or pending are the three actions that one would be able to take. But there are certain transactions which I will have to be either accepted or rejected. These transactions cannot be kept pending. And the most debatable and the most problematic case of this is an original credit note or an upward amendment. Upward amendment is still okay. It's not something which is going to be there on a very regular basis. But original credit note is something that taxpayers issue on a day in, day out basis in their business. What the IMS says is that credit note is something that cannot be kept pending. It has either to be accepted or rejected. Now imagine a scenario where an invoice has been issued by the taxpayer by a supplier to his recipient. Normally, in large manufacturing units, the time taken for the invoice to travel to the purchase register and get onto the reconciliation of the GST team, it takes probably a period of anywhere between 30 to 90 days. And let's say a credit note also has been issued after a period of 30 to 60 days from the date of issuance of invoice. So if the business team has not received the main invoice itself, how will it decide whether it has to accept or reject a credit note? In case of an invoice, it is simple. If that invoice is not matching, there is some discrepancy, it is there in IMS but not in my PR, I can keep it pending. I can park it as pending. But I have parked an invoice as pending and a credit note comes in, and I don't know whether this credit note pertains to an invoice which I had rejected earlier, or whether it pertains to an invoice which was pending, marked as pending, I will not be in a position to take a decision. I would want to keep that credit note as pending. But what the government is saying is that I will not allow you to keep a credit note as pending. That credit note will have to be either compulsorily accepted or will have to be compulsorily rejected. Now, what happens is, if you are uh, accepting a credit note, it will move as a negative amount into your GSTR 2B. And if you are rejecting a credit note, as we discussed earlier, it is not going to flow to your GSTR 2B. So accepting a credit note is going to reduce your credit. So as a recipient, what you would say is that if I'm not sure which this credit note pertains to, or whether I have taken an invoice, whether I have taken a credit on the original invoice for which this credit note has been issued, I am going to straight away reject the credit note, right? What would happen is that if you accept a credit note, as I said, it would go to reduce your ITC in your GSTR 2B, it will appear as a negative amount. But rejecting a credit note will add or increase the liability of your supplier in the next month. So let's say today is the 13, tomorrow 14 GSTR 2B is going to get generated. You have opened your 2B, you see some invoices, you go to IMS and you reject certain credit notes. These credit notes will get added to the liability of your supplier when he files his 3B for the month of February. January का credit note था which you have rejected while filing your return on the 20th of February, while filing the return of January. If you have rejected this, when your supplier now files his return for the month of February in the next month, which is in the month of March, he will see this credit notes added into his in his liability in the month of in the month of March. Now, there are other documents also where which cannot be kept pending. Second is downward amendment of. So first we said original credit note, or where an original credit note has been issued and that credit note has there is an upward amendment to that credit note. That upward amendment again cannot be kept pending. It will either have to be accepted or rejected. Similarly, if the original credit note was rejected and an amendment has been pushed by way of making a downward amendment, then in that case also this credit note cannot be kept pending. The downward amendment either has to be accepted or rejected. Now let's say original credit note was accepted and then there is a downward amendment. These type of transactions will be allowed to keep pending, because when the original credit note of say 100 was issued to you, you accepted that, it went into your GSTR 2B as a negative amount. Now that there is a downward amendment, if you are keeping it pending, there is no loss to the government. If you accept it, the reduction that was done earlier, 100 rupees ka, that will reduce. So minus minus will plus. It will again give you more credit if you accept this downward amendment. So that the government is saying that it is up to you. It's no loss to us. So you can keep it pending if you want. But if the original credit note was rejected, you had not reduced your liability, then downward amendment shall have to be either accepted or rejected. Similarly, a downward amendment of an invoice or a debit note where original document was accepted, in that case, if the supplier is reducing his liability by way of making a downward amendment, then the recipient shall have to accept it so that the supplier can reduce his liability. If the recipient doesn't accept it, if the recipient rejects it, then the supplier will not be allowed to reduce his liability. Right? Uh, since we are discussing amendments, it is also to be understood there are two types of amendments that can happen. If an invoice was uploaded, so as I said, how the transactions will flow to IMSs as soon as an invoice is generated. So we are sitting on 13th of February today. Let's say an invoice has been generated on today invoice. Invoice shall be populated within 4 to 48 hours in your GSTR1. So let's say by tomorrow that invoice is appearing in your IMS system, you take an action. The supplier has a time limit till 11th of the March to file this return finally, right? Before filing his return, although not legally allowed, theoretically or practically one person can go to his GSTR1 and make certain changes. These changes might be slight change in the invoice number, changes to the amounts of tax or anything, date of the invoice, etc. Whatever has been populated into the GSTR1, the supplier can go to his GSTR1 and make changes to these auto-populated details before he files the GSTR1. Before he files the GSTR1, if he does certain changes, it is known as an alteration. It will replace the original record in the GSTR1 that was appearing. So if you have taken any action on a particular invoice, and if the supplier goes and makes any changes to this invoice before filing his GSTR1, then your action will be reset on the government's portal. On the IMS portal, your action will be reset. The supplier can also go and delete a particular transaction which was auto-populated through e-invoicing. The e-invoice would stay on the IRP, the government will have the data, but practically the supplier has the option to go to GSTR1 module and delete it from there. He will of course get a notice of a mismatch between GSTR1 data as well as the e-invoice data, which he will have to deal with it. But as a recipient, you have to be aware that even if you have taken certain action before he files his GSTR1, even if you have accepted a particular invoice, he can go and delete a particular transaction or alter that transaction. So those transactions changed before the filing of GSTR1 are not considered as amended transactions, are to be considered as altered transactions. Now, let's say the transaction got auto-populated, the supplier also filed his GSTR1, and in the next month he goes and does certain amendment. In that case, there would be a separate line item which would appear in your IMS, and that has to be a separate action has to be taken. So, as we discussed in the previous slide, if an original credit note say was accepted and then there is an upward amendment, I will have to again accept that amendment. That we are talking about those amendment made after filing of GSTR1, and that can be done either through GSTR1A or the GSTR1 of the subsequent month. These kind of amendments will have to be separately dealt with. Now, let's say if I uh, had kept a certain transaction as pending, and if a fresh transaction has come in by way of an amendment onto the portal, I have to take some action on the original document so as to take action on the amended document. Action cannot be taken on an amended document without taking an action on the original document. Whereas in case of alteration, the document itself gets replaced. There are no two documents that is available. This is a fundamental difference which one has to understand when it comes to IMS. Coming back to the flow, as we discussed, this is what we discussed about the auto population of details onto the IMS. Now let us understand how do the transactions flow onto the GSTR2B. As we are all aware, GSTR2B gets generated on the 14th of the month. Next month, tomorrow GSTR2B is going to get generated for the month of January. Now, what transactions will appear in GSTR2B? Wherever you have taken, if let's say by tonight, if you are going to take any action into your IMS, if you are going to actively accept certain transactions, these transactions would move to the IMS. If you have not taken action on any transactions, certain or few transactions or any transactions at all in flowing into the IMS, all these transactions would move into the GSTR2B where no action has been taken. Pending transactions will be held back into the IMS. Rejected transactions will not be pushed into the GSTR2B. Till the time you file 3B, these reject transactions would be available into the IMS portal, but they would not form a part of GSTR2B. One important point to be noted is that GSTR2B is going to be sequential now. So if you have not filed the GSTR3B of the previous month, अगर दिसंबर का GSTR3B ही अब तक फाइल नहीं हुआ है, then January ka GSTR2B is not going to be generated. Similarly, amendments which will be made through GSTR1 or 1A, these will appear onto the, these transactions would appear into IMS on a real-time basis, but GSTR2B mein next month jayenge. So let's say the supplier has filed that those particular invoice or credit notes on the 11th of February, and he is now making an amendment to those invoices through GSTR 1A before filing the GSTR before filing the GSTR 3B, but after filing the GSTR 1. These transactions would appear into your IMS. You will be allowed to take an action, but because these transactions have been reported after the 11th of the month, these transactions would not flow to the GSTR 2B that is going to be generated tomorrow. Similarly, if GSTR1 is filed on a delayed basis, it has not been filed on time with that is the 11th of the month for normal taxpayers and 13 for the quarterly taxpayers. Let's assume for normal taxpayers only. 11th ko the supplier had to file his return. Let's say the invoice was appearing into your IMS because it was covered under e-invoice. You had taken an action, आपने accept action ले लिया था, but the supplier filed the return on the 12th of the month, or today he is filing the GSTR1. Even if you would have accepted this particular invoice, it will not flow to the GSTR2B. It will flow to the, GSTR2B, which will get generated tomorrow. It will flow to the GSTR2B of the next one, irrespective of the actions that you take on IMS. Only thing is that, as I said, IMS acts as a filter. It pushes the accepted and auto accepted transaction to GSTR2B, but GSTR2B still sees the compliance of GSTR1. If the invoice was compliant, that is, it was filed within the time limit of the due date of GSTR1, then and then GSTR2B will accept this accept or deemed accepted transactions. Otherwise, these transactions will remain into the IMS system and these transactions will not flow to GSTR2B. Similarly, earlier we were used to having line item details. So if one particular invoice had multiple rates, then GSTR2B used to have those line item details. Going forward, GSTR2B is not going to have those line item details. So this is how the GSTR2B will get generated. So tomorrow, the GSTR2B that gets generated will be on the basis of the actions that you would have taken till date. पिछले महीने के कोई invoices थे जो pending में थे, if you have accepted in this month, those transactions would also flow to GSTR2B. January's transactions, if no action has been taken and the return has been filed on a timely basis, those transactions would also flow. If old transactions, let's say October, November, December के transactions were not filed in time and they were filed after the 11th of December and before the 11th of not filed till 11th of December, they are now filed before the 11th of January. Between 12th of December and 11th of January, if these invoices have been filed, in those cases, these transactions would also flow to the GSTR2B. Now, let's say after the generation of GSTR2B, you decided that you want to take certain actions. Now, is it required that you have to take actions before the 14th only so that the GSTR2B gets auto-populated, or you can take action later on? The answer to that is, till the time you file your GSTR3B, you will be allowed to take different actions. So let's say on the 14th of the month, tomorrow, the GSTR2B gets generated. Because of Valentine, you are not working. Saturday, Sunday is also off. So on the 15th and 16th is also gone. On the 17th, you come to office, you do your reconciliation, and let's say you are using an advanced tool like probably Signet's tool to do an automated reconciliation, which gives you a reco within one day. You can, and then you decide that out of all the invoices which are auto accepted, there are certain transactions I want to keep pending. You can go back to the IMS window. You can mark these transactions as pending. And let's say there were certain transactions you realize that ये vendor हमारा है ही नहीं, we never purchased from this particular vendor. It doesn't belong to us. We want to reject these invoices. So let's say out of the 100 invoices that had come in into the GSTR2B, you go back to IMS. 3 transactions you mark as pending and 2 transactions you mark as reject. Now what you will have to do is you will have to recompute your GSTR2B. As soon as you recompute your GSTR2B, the actions that you had taken on IMS will again get reflected into your GSTR2B. So what would happen is the 100 invoices which are appearing earlier in your GSTR2B, उसमें से ये जो 3 transactions pending वाले थे, that will be held back into the IMS filter. 2 transactions which were rejected also will not flow. So now 95 transactions will flow to your GSTR2B. How many times you can keep going back to your IMS and keep recomputing the GSTR2B? There is no limit to go back, take your actions and recompute GSTR2B. But as a fellow professional, we all know the limitations of GSTN portal. In fact, considering the number of times people are going to recompute the GSTR2B and take actions on the IMS, it is, I think, where the government has restricted generation of GSTR2B in cases where you have not filed previous returns, as well as in cases where the line item details are not going to appear in your GSTR 2B. Those are all the steps that the government has taken so as to ensure, or the GSTN has taken to ensure that the load is minimized on the GSTN portal to the extent possible. Now, this is how the GSTR 2B is going to get computed and how the transactions will flow to GSTR 2B, how you will be able to go back and change your actions and recompute GSTR 2B. And then what happens when you file your GSTR 2B. Now, this is something you will have to pay close attention to. Once you file your GSTR 3B, your GSTR 2B freezes at that moment. You cannot now go to the IMS and change your action. So what would happen is the moment you file your GSTR 2B, just give me a second. So the the moment you file your GSTR 2B, the reject transactions as well as the accepted transactions move out of the IMS. So what we were discussing earlier is, जैसे ही 20 तारीख को 3B फाइल हुआ, GSTR 2B gets auto populate, the GSTR 2B gets frozen, and the transactions which were marked as rejected, accepted, or even the no action transactions which had automatically deemed accepted and moved into the GSTR 2B, these transactions would disappear from your IMS. You will not be able to see this transaction. You will not be able to come back and check those transactions कि किसका accept transaction था, किसका rejected था. GSTN portal से these three type of transactions will move away. What will be the transactions that would remain? So let's say on the 20th of February, you file your GSTR 3B. After that, what transactions would remain in IMS? First category of transactions, February ke transactions between 1st of February till 20th of February, whatever transactions have been reported through e-invoicing, those transactions would stay onto your IMS system. Transactions which were marked as pending, previous transactions, October se leke ab tak, if you are carrying certain transactions as pending, or the January's transaction, if you have marked certain transactions as pending, these transactions would also keep appearing into your IMS system. And as I said, certain transactions which belong to the month of January, you would have taken accept actions or reject actions, but return इनका time से file नहीं हुआ था. That return was not filed by the 11th of February. These transactions would also stay within the IMS. They would not have flown to the GSTR 2B. जितने भी transaction GSTR 2B में flow नहीं हुए थे, for which GSTR 3B has been filed, all these transactions would remain into the IMS. So as I said, filing of GSTR 3B will freeze GSTR 2B, except rejected transactions would move out. And the timelines that you have to take action into the IMS system is till the time you file your GSTR 3B. Till you file your GSTR 3B, you can keep going back to your IMS, take action, and then keep recomputing your GSTR 2B, right? We'll quickly, yeah, there's no question as such. Yeah. Oh, in fact, there are 8 questions in IMS on IMS in the Q&A box. But I think this was the flow. There is a second part of my presentation which I would want to take on. But let's quickly see if we want to take on certain questions which are there.
So there are a few questions in the Q&A box. You can go through, or I'll read it for you.
I can go through. So the first
Yeah,
question is, a credit note is in IMS, the input tax credit is already reversed over to earlier. What should we do? If we accept it, it will reduce our ITC, which is reversed already. Will it be a reversal 2 time? Very good answer. I think there is a case study which I will take. I mean, I do have certain scenarios around the same thing which I will take care of. Second question is legal consequences of no action except reject pending. Again, a very good question. I will take that. Chat is disabled.
Yeah, I have just seen that setting. We have
That's okay. I mean, anyways, chat
So
we
you
will
can
recognize
write
only
the
for
questions in the Q&A box as well, or chat box now.
any question should be in Q&A box only. It
Yes,
is good
please.
that it has been disabled. I think I wanted to make it interactive, but then I realized that I had to cover a lot of things and we had less
Right.
time, so I did ask those questions. So that's okay. Let's keep the chat disabled. The next question is the original credit note. So Sapanji, Dharmendra ji and anonymous attendee, I will come back to your questions as I move ahead with my presentation. The next question is the original credit note issued in September 24 was rejected due to oversight. Let's keep it October 24 because that is when the IMS was implemented. September 24 mein IMS was not there. So let's say the original credit note was issued in October 24 and was rejected due to oversight and was not related against an invoice of 23-24. What remedy can now be done by the recipient? Kuljit ji, please check your question. Do you mean that the invoice was related to or the credit note was related to 23-20? What I understand is that credit note was issued in October 24 and it pertained to an invoice for the month of March 24 and it was rejected by mistake. There's no solution to it right now because the time limit for issuance of a credit note for the time for the period 23-24 was October only. I mean that is till the time 16 4 ka time limit, a similar time limit is there for credit notes as well. So that October 30th was the last when the credit note could have been issued. What you can do is you can take benefit of the advisory of the government in the month of October when the IMS came in. The government, the GSTN had issued an advisory which said that if you have taken any action by mistake, but again, this should have been done in the month of October only. They had very clearly said that if you had made certain mistakes in the IMS, you ascertain your proper liability and your input tax credit and take the relevant make those modifications in your GSTR 2B. So अगर आपने ये जो credit note गलती से reject किया था, if you had taken the effect in GSTR 3B, then you are saved by the advisory, but you had rejected it और आपने GSTR 3B में जाके वो credit आपने उसका credit कम नहीं किया है and your supplier also it got added to his liability and he had also not reduced his liability manually in his GSTR 3B. I think the time to take action has gone now. If it was taken care of at that time, you can take the benefit of the advisory of the government. ISD credit and import credit still not appearing in IMS and 2B. Can we take credit directly in 3B? Ashwinji, yes. I think I missed out mentioning that point. IGST credit and credit in respect of ISD are also supposed to come to IMS, but they are under pipeline. The government is trying to integrate those. Till that time, these transactions would directly move to your GST or 2B and you can take credit accordingly. Next question is IMS compulsory now? Very good question. Just give me a moment. Ma'am, I am in a discussion. I will call you. Next question is IMS mandatory? The answer to that is, as of now, the government has introduced it in such a fashion that it has been made optional. While it is optional, we will discuss and the questions that have been asked, the legal consequences as well as जो दो questions मैंने पार किए हैं, that will throw light as to how optional it is in the current state as well. But the law has not been changed as of now. The law as it stands currently, Section 38 speaks about auto population of GSTR to be based on the invoices that are uploaded in my GSTR 1. So based on that, my GSTR 2B only has to be generated. बीच में जो filter लगा दिया है, it doesn't have the legal sanctity. So in that case, you can say that IMS is an optional functionality, and the GSTN advisory itself, which implemented IMS, which gave the details about IMS itself, said that IMS is a totally optional functionality. So you can take that view. But the way government is moving ahead with IMS, in fact, if you see the updates or the press release of 55th Council meeting, which was held in the month of December, they had proposed amendments to the GST law, which very clearly said that we are going to bring these changes into the law to make which would have implemented the entire IMS framework. And if you see the budget amendments to Section 34, Section 38, and Section 39, it very clearly is in the same direction of implementing IMS. So what they have done is they have made one change to Section 38, wherein Section 38 referred to an auto-generated statement. वो auto-generated निकाल दिया है. Till now, GSTR 2B was getting auto-generated based on the filing that was done, being done on the GSTR 1. उसके basis पे GSTR 2B generate हो जाता था. Now going forward, since based on your IMS actions and you are going to take actions again and again and recompute your GSTR 2B, it is no more an auto-generated statement. So auto-generated words जो है that they have proposed to, the budget proposes to remove these words from section 38 and 39. Similarly, section 39, I think I've seen a lot of webinars done by a lot of people on the budget amendments, and I think section 34 is something that has been extensively being discussed, wherein it is said that section 34 now, earlier only section 15 said that if a credit note has been issued for any discount, then unless and until the recipient has reversed the credit, the supplier will not be allowed to reduce the credit. Section 15(3) का condition था. Section 34, which dealt about the credit notes, said that if a credit note has been issued, then the supplier has to ensure that he had not passed on the burden of the tax. Only then he will be allowed to reduce the credit. It did not very specifically, it indirectly said this through this burden. Now it very specifically says that the supplier has to ensure that the recipient has reduced the credit. अभी ensuring कैसे होगा? अभी तक तो on a basis of a circular which was issued earlier by the government, you had to take a certificate from the recipient to state that he has reversed that amount of credit. Up to 2 lakh self certificate and more than 2 lakh a CS certificate was required. So whether that certificate would still be required, I don't know. The answer would come in when the rules come in. But I think the amendment to the section 34 is in line with what was expected through an IMS. What I think the rules would provide now is that if a credit note has been auto accepted or an accept, which means that it has gone as a negative amount by the recipient, and the supplier, he will be able to say this in his supplier view that my recipient has accepted my credit note, that should be a sufficient compliance of this section 34. And accordingly, a certificate may not be required. The supplier might straight away go and reduce his liability. In fact, he would have ideally reduced his liability, but through this section 34, I think a rule 60 and rule 67F is something that they are going to 67A or something that they are going to notify, which was mentioned in 55th Council's recommendation. The rules are going to have a very detailed code so far as the procedural aspect of IMS come in. So this was a long answer. The short answer is yes, IMS is optional right now, but we'll see certain cases where you will still not be able to say that IMS is optional. And the way the government is pushing ahead with all these amendments, the announcement which was made in respect of hard locking of GSTR 3B, etc., the way the direction in which the government is moving, the IMS is eventually going to be mandatory. Without making IMS mandatory, I think it will be impossible for the government to move ahead with the locking of GSTR 3B, locking of liability as well as input tax credit in GSTR 3B. So eventually IMS is going to be mandatory is what I feel. Right? I think this all we have discussed. So these are the timeline of, and this PPT we have been running through since IMS was introduced, advisory was introduced in September 2024. We said that the government has brought in 1A. So now they are saying, yes, whatever liability you are showing through 1, if you want to make certain corrections, you make it through GSTR 1A. So now you should not be making any changes to your GSTR 3B. If you do it now, I am going to issue an automated notice to you. Similarly, ITC reclaim ledger, we discussed, because they were not having those line item details, that was introduced. Negative liability ledger was something introduced. Similarly, RCM ledger, where if you are paying 100 rupees of liability, you should not be claiming a credit of more than 100 in your liability ledger, is something that government had introduced, and then IMS was introduced. While the advisory of hard locking of returns came in 17th of October 2024, this is something that we were trying to put as a poser. Is the government moving towards a non-editable return? Is something that we were discussing during our presentations. Let me quickly look at other questions. How can we find rejected invoices issued but rejected by recipient for the previous month? So I believe, Sapan, you are talking about invoices. As a supplier, you have raised an invoice. The recipient has rejected this invoice. Then in the GSTN, on the GSTN portal, there are two views available. One is a recipient view and one is a supplier view. Recipient view is where you can go and take actions, which is accept, reject, pending. And then there is another view which is known as a supplier view. Similar to Instagram, you can see whatever post you make, you see whoever has liked, whoever has comment. Similar to that, there is a supplier view which is available on the IMS portal. You can go and check in your supplier view whether all the invoices have been accepted, rejected, or kept pending. Only challenge with the government's portal right now is that on the recipient as well as the supplier view is that you will not be able to, on the recipient side, if the invoices are more than 500, you will not be able to see all the invoices, you will not be able to apply filters, etc., and take bulk actions. Similarly, on the supplier side also, you will have to put those invoice numbers and check if the invoices are more than 500. You will not be able to have detailed working. You will have to, Excel is not available for download for supplier view. For recipient view, you can download the Excel, you can check all those invoices, but then again go and take manual actions on all invoices one by one. If the invoices are more than 500, you are not able to filter it. In the supplier side, I think there is no limit on the viewing of number of invoices, but you are not able to download that Excel, which is where the role of GSPs like Signet come in. If time permits, I will quickly also show what we have developed at Signets in. I think we have a good 20 minutes to go. In case of incorrect invoice available in IMS due to any error by supplier and subsequent supplier issues credit note, in such case, we have to accept such invoice and reverse temporary ITC. So can adjust ITC. Ashwinji, good question again. Allow me some time. I will get back to this question. Manish ji, in case of a builder, we can't avail ITC but need to report all these ITC as ineligible in GSTR 3B. What we should do in IMS? Accept all the, do your matching, whatever invoices are matching, accept those transactions. Then these transactions will move to your GSTR 2B. GSTR 2B में आएंगे, GSTR 2B से आपके GSTR 3B में टेबल 4A5 में जाएंगे. Then in compliance with circular 170, you will have to do a permanent reversal of this ineligible credit. ऐसा करेंगे तो ही state governments को revenue मिलेगा. If you don't do this, if you straight away reject all the invoices, then state governments will not get the credit. So the ideal way is to accept the invoices, get them into your 2B, then get them into your table 4A5 of GSTR 3B, and then do a permanent reversal. E-invoice generated, but time was left since client was raised a credit note for rejection and GSTR 3B liability. We'll discuss that in recent budget proposal. Government includes, correct, Ashwinji, you have answered what I was also saying. Ineligible credit we don't take. What do we do in IMS? I've already answered. Ajay ji, same question was raised by Manish ji. I've answered that. If transactions are more than 500, how can I accept pending? Is there an offline utility available? The government has not made any offline utility available. Sai Sravanji, you can make use of GSPs like Signet. I will quickly show what kind of solution do we have. Section 39 amendment, can you throw light on it? It's the same thing. I think GSTR 3B, section 39, there are two amendments. One is they have removed this auto drafted statement reference. And secondly, they are saying that you will be able to file GSTR 3B only after GSTR 2B is generated. So earlier, before this budget amendment, I remember taking a session in the month of November somewhere on IMS at one of the study circles in Ahmedabad, and there was a question raised by a participant saying that we don't follow GSTR 2B, we take credit as per books only, and we file GSTR 3B also on 13. हम लोग 2B का wait ही नहीं करते sir. Then what happens after IMS? I didn't have an answer at that time. I have an answer right now. You treat IMS as an optional functionality. Right now you are allowed to file your GSTR 3B without having GSTR 2B generated. Going forward, you will not be able to file your GSTR 3B without generating GSTR 2B. Now, eventually, if the government wants to make that hard locking mandatory, this is a step towards hard locking. If your if the government wants to freeze your input tax credit in your GSTR 3B, that has to come through your GSTR 2B, which is where the government is saying that till the time GSTR 2B gets generated, I will not allow you to file 3B only. So 2B से ही data 3B में जाएगा. Right now you will be allowed to make it amend it manually, but slowly and gradually once they want to make it mandatory, they want to make hard locking mandatory. What they will do is IMS से 2B generate होगा, 2B से credit 3B में populate होगा. That they will not allow you to populate. This is what the amendment of 339 is to enable the government to introduce all this. These all procedural aspect will come onto the rules of hard locking, etc. Mansi Kadam, can you please explain acceptance of B2B amended invoices? So once there is an amendment to any invoice, the delta effect comes in. So let's say I had raised an invoice of 100 and now I'm making an amendment saying that invoice was of 90. If you had accepted that invoice earlier, 100 का credit आपको मिला था. Now I am amending it to 90. You are accepting that invoice. That invoice, that 90 का delta जो है, that credit will go as a reduction, as a negative amount into your GSTR 2B as well as GSTR 3B. Similarly, reverse case, 100 का invoice था, you had accepted. Now the invoice has been amended as 110. You accept that, you will get additional credit of 10 rupees. That is how it goes. Some recent developments, we can skip that. 3B locking, etc. also we have discussed. Now coming to the question whether IMS is entirely optional, what happens to my credit notes, etc. These are all the questions, and let me answer that one by one. One very important question raised by Dharmendra ji is what are the legal consequences of accept, reject, pending, which is something what I had written in some of the posers into my flow of IMS. The first is implications of rejection of invoice. As somebody had also asked in the audience, uh, if I had by mistaken rejected an invoice or a credit note, but I want to take credit manually, can I take it? Right now, the answer is yes, based on the advisory of GSTN, which says that IMS is an optional functionality. It was for the month of October only, wherein they said that because it is being implemented for the first time, you ascertain your credits and liabilities properly and make changes into GSTR 3B before filing it and take the relevant credit. You can still take the benefit of it, but 6 months are going to get over since the implementation of IMS very soon. The budget amendments have come in. Once the budget amendments are notified, after that, if you reject a particular invoice, can you still take a stand that galti se reject ho gaya, I still wanted credit? The answer is no. And the GSTN advisory also was for the month of October. For the month of December, January, if you have by mistake rejected a invoice, but you still manually take the credit, there would be a difference between the credit as per GSTR 2B versus the credit that you have taken finally in GSTR 3B. And those these notices are bound to come in. And those notices would come after a couple of years where the officer is definitely going to take a stand that you had the powers in your hand, IMS आपके पास था, you could have taken correct actions, you have actively taken action, आप ही ने तो reject किया है, then how can you take the credit? All those kind of notices are bound to come. So while it is an optional functionality, whether it is still, if you are completely ignoring IMS, not logging into IMS, सब कुछ auto accept में जा रहा है, then you can take all the stands that boss I was not following IMS, I don't know what happened through your IMS, मुझे नहीं पता है 2B कैसे populate हुआ, this is my ultimate credit, 2A में भी दिख रहा है ठीक से, and people were facing these issues in the initial 2-3 months. Invoice properly file हुआ है by the 11th, it was there in IMS, but even though after accepting this invoice was not flowing into my GSTR 2B, it was there in GSTR 2A. So these kind of problems you could definitely very well challenge. But other than that, if you have taken a reject action or you have marked certain invoices pending, so 23-24 का invoice था, you had marked that invoice as pending, और वो एक ही महीना था टाइम लिमिट लेने के लिए, वो आफ्टर दैट वो ऑटोमेटिकली इनएलिजिबल क्रेडिट में चला गया, then can you say that ये गलती से हो गया था, this was not IMS was optional, so this cannot be held against me? The answer is yes, but to get that relief, you will have to go up to High Court. These officers are not going to give you the benefit of it. Similarly, the question of Dharmendra ji, what are the legal consequences of or accept or deemed accepted? If you are saying that IMS is completely optional and you are going to, follow it on a deemed accepted basis, whether then can you challenge that invoice? Let's say there is an MSME supplier who has raised an invoice to you, you want to dispute that invoice, but he can see in a supplier view that you have already accepted that invoice or it has gone as an into your GSTR 2B by way of a deemed acceptance. He will come to you and say that sir आपने GSTN portal पे तो accept किया है, that credit has flown to your GSTR 2B. Now you cannot challenge that invoice to me. So can you now then take a view that no, that is different, it was auto accepted, I had not taken any action, I want to dispute that invoice? That is going to be challenge. Similarly, as a recipient, if you have rejected an invoice, and the supplier maintains that it was a correct invoice, आपके रिजेक्ट करने से मेरा लाइबिलिटी तो कम नहीं होता है, आई एम गोइंग टू anyways pay the tax, so you have rejected the invoice, not taken the credit, it is not my problem. You go ahead, do whatever you want, I have raised that invoice, khatam ho gaya baat, I am not going to do anything. Now can you take that credit manually or not? Again, that is a big question. So these are all questions again which are going to come in. So you can either be fully into IMS or fully outside IMS. You cannot take selective pending, एक आध दो invoice pending reject कर दिया and बाकी then you can say that अरे बाकी सब तो auto accepted था, I don't want to follow it. That is something that will be held against you, even though the government has said that it's an optional functionality. And again, deemed acceptance is going to have commercial challenges, no matter how much you say that it's an optional functionality. Coming to those questions with respect to credit note, I think the fundamental question that everybody has is that what happens if, just allow me a second.
Hello, Tapas, you are not audible. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, sorry, I think there was some disturbance. There was some glitch. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
audible properly now.
Yes.
Yeah. So what I was saying is credit note में the fundamental challenge that is going to come in is that invoice has been issued. It was an e-invoice. 24 घंटे में ही cancel हो सकता है. After 48 hours, you realize that invoice was to be, it was an incorrect invoice. शैलेश जी की जगह पे मेरा GST number डाल दिया था. Now there is no other way out. Although you can practically go to GSTR1 and make changes to this, the data that has been auto-populated, legally it is not correct क्योंकि IRN में सब कुछ report हो चुका है. Now you going to GSTR1 and changing it will not be correct. So the only option that you have right now is issuing a credit note to cancel that invoice and raise a fresh invoice. Now the practical challenge here is that अगर मुझे invoice issue करना था and by mistake it was invoiced to Shailesh Bhai and he doesn't recognize you as a vendor, he will go and reject this invoice. Now to correct the invoice, to raise a fresh invoice, you will issue a credit note. Shailesh ji will say that मैंने तो invoice का credit ही नहीं लिया है, मैं credit note क्यों accept करूँ? I will reject the credit note as well. In that case, practically what would happen is you will never be allowed to reduce the credit of the, I mean, reduce the liability of the old invoice and raise a fresh invoice. You will always be in that circle because of the rejection at the supplier's end. So legally, as such, there is no option available. Practically, what one could do, I mean, till the time the government comes up with another option, is that you don't report both. You realize that invoice which was raised is incorrect and the credit note itself is also incorrect. You don't report any of the invoices on the GSTN portal. So what would happen is 100 invoice the credit note, the 101 documents had gone to the IRP portal. IRN पे 101 invoices की IRP पे IRN generate हुई है, but GSTR1 में सिर्फ 99 documents गए हैं. You might receive a notice from the government saying that why is there a difference, but ultimately if you see the net tax impact, it is going to be zero because आपको invoice ही आपने credit note से reject किया था. Or the another invoice is to reduce, go to an amendment and reduce the amount itself to a minuscule amount, which even if the supplier, if the recipient rejects both the invoice as well as credit note, you don't get affected by it. Again, इसमें question वही आएगा that invoice में details, let's say if it was a lakh rupee का invoice, I reduce it to 1 rupee, is that okay? The answer to that is you will have to justify to the government or the courts saying that the government did not leave me with any other option. So the best option right now is to ensure that your invoices are correct. Whenever an invoice has been raised on somebody, if it's a regular customer, engage with them that ये गलती हुआ था, this is my invoice and this is the credit note. You please accept both. I will raise a fresh invoice to you so as to nullify the first invoice and credit note, and then you can get the credit of the fresh invoice that I have received. So I think the question was if a credit note is in IMS, the input tax. The next question is I had already reversed an input tax credit of a particular invoice in my books of accounts. उसके बाद credit note आया IMS में. Now if I accept, I would have already reversed the credit note. Will it be a double reversal? How do I tackle that? Or understand a scenario, and this I have heard from most of my clients who are in manufacturing. They are saying that we receive invoices, but what happens is goods are received in a deficit quantity. So let's say 100 का goods आने थे, ultimately goods 90 के ही आए. In terms of section 16, I take credit of 90 only because 10 के goods मेरे पास आए ही नहीं थे. In that case, the supplier also knows that supplier after 2-3 months he will be issuing a credit note. Right now I am taking an invoice of 9 credit of 90 only, although GST या 2B में 100 है, and IMS doesn't allow partial acceptance. तो मैंने तो accept किया, 100 गया 2B में, but I am ultimately taking 90 का credit only. Now later on he issues a credit note. What should I do? The answer to that is bit complicated, but this is the only option that I see, which is 100% compliant method. You have all heard of Circular 170. Circular 170 क्या बोलता है? 2B में whatever amount is available, you take the full credit and then do a temporary reversal or a permanent reversal. So what one should do now is, invoice 100 का आया, you had to take 90 का credit only. You take full credit in table 4A5. वहां पे 90 मत लीजिए, table 4A5 में 400 का credit. Then do a temporary reversal of 10 in table 4D, 4B2 of GSTR 3B. Story stops here. You have taken net credit of 90 only, which is in compliance with section 16. Now 3 महीने बाद supplier ने credit note issue किया. What you will do is, you take a credit of, you accept this credit note. So मान लीजिए उस महीने का आपका credit was 100. By accepting this credit note, आपका credit reduce होकर 90 हो जाएगा. You then reavail the credit which was earlier reversed. So आप 4A5 में वापस 10 डालेंगे, 4D1 में आप reavailment दिखाएंगे 10 का. So जो credit note का negative amount आया था, that will be set off by the reavailment that you would have done. और वो महीने का 100 का credit है, वही आपको मिल जाएगा. So it's a long process, but it will save you from all those unnecessary notices from the department. Now the question would come in, sir, initial slide में आप ही ने बोला था कि temporary reavailment और reclaim से बचने के लिए IMS आ रहा है. Yes, but the way certain things, because the credit notes cannot be kept pending and partial acceptance, etc., is not allowed. These are all the problems which would require these kind of solutions. So as of now, the solution is this only: follow Circular 170 properly, which would address these kind of scenarios. And credit notes as well. I think this is a fundamental issue. Till the time the government allows amendment to e-invoicing, ये credit note के issue रहेंगे ही. Once if the government allows modification to e-invoice itself, then I think majority of the problems which pertain to wrong issuance of credit, I mean wrong issuance of e-invoice which has to be cancelled by a credit note, etc., would go away. And I think government probably is thinking seriously on these lines. So these will get solved. E-invoice generated, but time was left when client raised the credit note. Yeah, I think this I have answered, Ashwin ji. Chintan ji, in case e-invoice is applicable to us, e-invoice is generated on GST of customer A, error identified in the next month. I've already given that example of mine and Sailesh ji, so I'm skipping that right now. Only thing I think you have to do is, if you have raised an invoice on a wrong person, you have to reach out to them probably somehow and make them accept both the documents. If not, then as I gave the other two options, I think those are the only two options. If you feel that this guy is going to reject both your invoice and credit notes. What do invoices correct but credit cannot be taken in GST, like transportation and food, except food? So yeah, if invoice is correct and it's a blocked credit, as I said, you accept the invoice, let it move to your GST or 2B, और फिर उसको permanent reversal table 4B1 में दिखाएंगे. Ashwin ji, again next question: if I have uploaded one invoice in wrong GSTN and same person has accepted the same, then can we be able to amend the same invoice in the next or not? A very good question. Ideally, e-invoice है, if it's an e-invoice, you will not be allowed to amend it. You will have to issue a credit note, but there are chances, if it's an unscrupulous person, he might keep rejecting your credit note because उसको तो free का credit मिला है. In that case, the practical solution for you is to go and amend the invoice only. And in that case, you will have to take this thing. I didn't have any other option. This was an unknown vendor. We issued a credit note. He kept on rejecting the credit notes. So ultimately, what we couldn't raise a fresh invoice. So we had to amend the earlier invoice only. but everything has to be documented as to what happened and why you took certain questions, right? I think same questions would have been asked onto the chat box as well. I'm not going into chat box. Deepti ji, do we have some time to show the functionalities that we have, or do we have a?
So if we can check that if participants want to spare 5 more minutes, so we can definitely go with that functionalities. So I would like to have a comment from the participant in the chat box. Do they want to see the functionality? If yes, please type yes so that our speaker also feel enthusiastic to have to go ahead with the presentation. Else we'll just sum up it right now with the time limit of 7 p.m. So,
I think there are very
uh,
quick back-to-back yes coming in. So let's spend 5-6
so
minutes. I'll
if
very
all
quickly.
agree, then we can extend it for next 5 minutes.
Sure, sure. Just give me a minute.
Meanwhile, I would like to share that I have shared our YouTube link of this today's webinar. So you can refer through that link. Uh, if you want to watch it again, go through, clarify again some points, then you can please go through that YouTube live video of today's webinar. Second thing, I have also shared with you the YouTube channel link, our WhatsApp channel link, and community link also. Please join that so that you can be updated with your all our upcoming webinars. And I have, and also there's an opportunity for each one of you to join us as a speaker. So please connect me directly on WhatsApp. If you are interested to join as a speaker, share your topic details and profile with me. We will be happy to organize you and give you the platform where you can groom yourself as a speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll share my screen.
Yeah,
I'll share the
please.
full screen itself. I think that may not be a good idea. My system has hanged.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there a timer of 7 p.m.?
No, 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 no. My because I probably shared the entire screen, my system
Yes,
got
yes, yes.
uh,
So,
hanged.
okay.
Yeah.
So,
So my screen is visible, right?
yeah, reconciliation. GST and ITC.
So this is our Signet tool that we have, and I mean it's an entire. We have different modules for ISD returns and various different stuff. So what we have done is we have an IMS module which has been created, and in that this is a summary that is available which shows the different types of records which are there and in which category. And then we have a reconciliation module. So what happens in the reconciliation module is that once you upload your purchase data, the system fetches the GSTR to be, sorry, the IMS data from the GSTN portal on a daily basis. And the system automatically tries and does the matching of the invoice versus invoice as per your books versus the invoice as per the IMS. Now, once the matching has been done, you can take different actions. So the bulk actions that we are talking about, what I will do is I will very quickly show the different types of reconciliation actions that we have. So we have matched by tolerance. Matched is something where all the details of the invoices are matching. Second is matched by tolerance. In case of matched by tolerance, it means that within the time limit of within the limit of 10 rupee or 100 rupees, whatever tolerance you set, you are be the if the difference of tax amount is such within the tolerance limit, it will show as matched by tolerance. If the difference is more than the tolerance limit, it shows as mismatched. Then we have AI based reconciliation, which is a near match that we have. In this, we have 6 different buckets of reconciliation, wherein we have potential one, which has a probable match. In this case, if let's say there is an invoice which is named numbered 001 in your books of accounts, but the vendor, when he has uploaded, he has named it as ABC/2024-25/001, or he has mentioned some other way, 001 is coming first, so on and so forth. I think, I mean, there are different reasons of the invoice number is not exactly matching, but somehow on a near basis it would match. In those cases, we have it a probable match. Similarly, we have matching on a pan basis. So if the vendor had raised an invoice on your Karnataka location, but you have recorded it in Maharashtra location, it will also give you a location difference. Vice versa, you have booked the invoice from vendor's West Bengal location, but he would have raised an invoice from a Sikkim location, then that also is something that appears in our reconciliation section. Now, in order to automate, what we have done is based on the action items, what we have done here is we show the counterfiling status, which is filed, not filed. This is the invoice details, and the details of accept, reject, pending are available. You can come here and select actions for each and every invoice, or if you want to do a bulk action, we have bulk action. So if all my invoices, credit note, etc. are matching, I can give a bulk action that whatever is matching, I want to mark those transactions as accept. If the invoices are matching with tolerance also, I want to accept that. If invoices are matching as if invoices are only in IMS, which means that they are not in my books, I will mark them as pending. So all these kind of different actions, I can select the reconciliation actions, and I can define these actions, and I will very quickly apply bulk actions, and all these bulk actions will get applied. This is a demo HTML file, so you will not be able to see live actions, but that's how it works. We have done another automation wherein uh, you can by default set those IMS action. Here we have IMS action, and you can go into the custom scenario wherein you can by default set your actions. अगर match है तो मुझे हमेशा accept ही करना है. Match by tolerance है, I want to again accept it. If the transaction is only in IMS, I want to keep it pending. Now, if it is in only in IMS and if it is credit notes which cannot be kept pending, it will go into default no action. Then near match में the buckets that I was talking about, if let's say the near match is happening because of POS mismatch, POS is something which is very important for me. In that case, I will tell the system कि इसको pending में park करके रखो. Similarly, if it is potential one which is slight invoice number changes, I would want to accept those transactions. I can keep all those bucket. I can keep adding those buckets and define those criteria. What would happen is when my purchase data gets uploaded or IMS का data भी when it has been downloaded, system automatically reconciliation run करेगा, and based on the settings that I have done, यहाँ पे मेरा accept reject pending automatically हो गया होगा. What I would have to do ultimately is just check all those invoice properly, review my actions, change those actions if required, and then push my IMS actions to GSTN system. जैसे ही I push my actions to GSTN system, वो actions will start getting reflected onto the GSTN IMS portal. Then once that is done, even if somebody wants to do a reconciliation on Excel, I can go here, I can select download Excel for Rico upload. There is a column that we have specifically given for those accept, reject, and pending actions. You can take those actions in Excel and upload that Excel into our format. We would map, that those actions will be captured into the Signet portal. And again, you can come here and then push your actions onto the GST system. Once that is done, you can generate the GSTR to be on demand. As we discussed, there are certain transactions which are not flowing into IMS, like import transactions, ISD transactions. For those transactions or transactions which are earlier transactions जो open में थे, GSTR 2B में पहले आ गए थे till October, but because you did not have these transactions into your PR, they were opened into your system. वो सारे transactions भी जो 2B से reconcile करने हैं, you can go into again our normal returns, and in our normal returns you can go into our purchase data, and then reconciliation can be done here. So this is a very brief understanding of our tool. If somebody wants to have a detailed demo, etc., I'm just pasting my email ID into the chat box. You can please feel free to drop me an email, and I will arrange a demo from my team. Yeah, I've pasted my email ID onto the chat box. If you can reach out, I'm available on LinkedIn as well. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn as per your convenience. Yeah, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Tapas, for this wonderful presentation. We would like to have feedback from all our participants who have joined this today's very informative webinar, and of course, much needed topic, invoice management system. And we have with us CA Sridhar Shah, the President of Income Tax Bar Association, Ahmedabad. Welcome, Sridhar ji. Good to see you. Pleasure
Thank you.
seeing you.
Good to see you actually.
Thank you.
Sorry, I could not join
I am
the.
not able to sorry, I am not able to send an invoice in a bulk to the members. It only allows me to send messages to host and panelist only. So maybe
Yes.
So,
either you can forward my message.
So
Yeah.
we'll send from your behalf to our participants. We want
Sure.
to, okay, thank you. So we have Sridhar ji with us. So over to you, Sridhar ji.
Sorry, I could not join in the beginning. But yes, when I decided that we want to have a session on IMS, then Tapas was the obvious choice, working in both the sides as a CA, as a CA of those few CAs who took that information technology subject very seriously while studying. So, thank you, Tapas, for sharing such valuable insights. I could not join as panelist, but yes, I seen the webinar and excellent. And I'm sure our participants today must have received valuable insight about how IMS is going to change their fate in GST practice, especially compliance practice, and they will have to make a decision who will do this work. So with that, I would like to thank Tapas. I would also like to thank Advocate Shailesh Makwana, President GST, who joined, is very enthusiastic and in doing all this webinar and always supportive. And all the participants who joined for such webinar, we will be coming up with new sessions. And now we have got lot of masala in form of new income tax bill. So definitely GST and income tax both now going hands in hands. And we will be having a lot of sessions coming. So stay tuned. Everyone is requested to join the GyaanStation community channel on WhatsApp so that you can stay updated about all these things. With this, thanks again, Tapas, for sharing valuable insights and